And it's, so I'm glad that we're having this task force, this hearing before these experts to find out how we can relieve that tension in our communities so that we continue to have law enforcement that is respected and is able to do their job without fear of being attacked because they happen to wear the badge. And I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Poe. Thank you, Judge. Mr. Knight.
Well, good morning. I'd like to say thank you to the Sheriff and Luke for providing an opportunity where we can talk about this. My name is Stephen Knight. I was an 18-year veteran of LAPD, and during that time I worked an awful lot of different units, including 3 years with gangs. So I got to see an awful lot of the community connection of young people that maybe have gone down the wrong road, and we're trying to get them curved back to the right road, or catching the young ones before they did something like follow their brother into the wrong line of business. But my opinion of what we're doing here is looking at best practices, looking at what might be happening in a department in Indiana compared to a department in New Mexico or something like that, and saying it doesn't always work the same, but when we find best practices, we can normally talk about them and we can normally get some good ideas. Technology is changing police work today, more than probably we've seen in at least my lifetime. And those issues are having dramatic effects on what departments will do and what departments will not do. In my area alone, I have two of the largest police departments, largest law enforcement departments in the country, LA Sheriff and LAPD. They've both taken a 180-degree turn on the body cameras. One is doing them, they're jumping out and they're doing the cameras, and the other one is a little bit reluctant. They're gonna make some studies and see what they can do with the with what the cameras will do when the cameras are on, when the cameras might be off, and the storing of the information, all of those issues. So I think the technology will be something that we've talked about quite a bit in law enforcement. And then how the community is seen. You know, for 17 of my 18 years, I was under a consent decree. The Christopher Commission was basically driving what LAPD did, and that is really difficult to do police work when you've got a consent decree and you've got a sergeant and 3 officers looking at every little thing that you do, instead of making sure that you're out there protecting the community and having a good relationship with them. So I think that that's something that we will talk about quite often, and we will look at the differences between departments and see what we can come up with. But I appreciate this very much.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. So we're fortunate to have a distinguished panel of witnesses today, and you probably didn't know you were distinguished, but now you are distinguished because you're part of this panel. So we're interested in hearing from you, and obviously that's why we invited you here, and thank you for being here. And the first person that will ask us to speak is the Honorable Greg Zeller. And Mr. Zeller was elected Indiana's 42nd Attorney General in November 2008 and sworn into office January 12, 2009. Mr. Zeller was reelected to a second term in November 2012, sworn in to office January 2013. Attorney General Zeller created and serves as co-chair of Indiana's Prescription Drug Task Force, supports the expansion of school resource officers, and serves as the National Association of Attorneys General Tobacco Committee Chair. Prior to state government, Zeller spent 10 years as an executive assistant to Dan Quayle, first in Senator Quayle's U.S. Senate office and then in the office of the Vice President of the United States. He also served in other government capacities and was in private practice for 10 years before joining the Attorney General's office in 2001, serving as the Chief Deputy until 2008. So thank you and welcome, and we're interested in having you share your thoughts and ideas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the task force. I do have some formal remarks that I'll provide, but I'd like to dispense with that and just kind of speak a little more openly. You know, the Attorney General, not just of Indiana, but across the country, we all serve as somewhat force multipliers within the criminal justice system. So we work regularly with law enforcement, prosecutors, and judges. We actually work within the 3 branches of government very often with the legislature. And obviously with the federal government, sometimes we're on the same side, and sometimes we're on opposite sides. But I come here today really to speak about some of the experiences that attorneys general have generally experienced, but also for my own state of Indiana. I think this relationship between law enforcement and our communities is one that I appreciate your focus on. I often talk to law enforcement about the need to develop and maintain the respect of the citizenry, much like the military, who I think over the years we've seen kind of a growing respect. You all probably travel quite a bit. You're at the airport, and you see how military in uniform, applause that breaks out. They allow them the first seats on the plane, a much higher level of respect. But if you compare that to our law enforcement officials who serve and protect and put their lives on the line the same way as our military, and yet they've not received the same type of public respect. And I think it should be our mission to raise that public support and maintain the respect, because it's really at the, let's say, the heart of our criminal justice system. Things break down very quickly without the respect of those who serve and protect. So I think this task force and your mission is one that I think is timely. The collaboration between federal, state, and local is key, and I think most of the law enforcement is done on the local level. So even at a state level, I see our role as primarily one of support. But I know we receive quite a bit of support from the federal government through the Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programming, Bureau of Justice Assistance. So there's a lot of federal support that I think is crucial. You'll hear more about the needs for training and some of the things within the law enforcement community. But I'm here to specifically talk about one area that my office has focused on, and it doesn't really address, let's say, the current problems that we have with this, as Mr. Poe pointed out, the tension between the public and law enforcement. I do think that's really at a crucial point in time that we need to address it. But I would point out that what we've done in Indiana is invest in the future. The school resource officers, we've got a new program in Indiana. We've a grant of $20 million that the state put up for a 2-year funding to get school resource officers into our middle schools and high schools particularly. It's seen particularly as a way of securing the building, but it's more than just a gun at the door. The relationship being developed every day between a law enforcement officer who's essentially in community policing within a very unique community. What we've seen over the years that we've been doing this is the relationships between the students who are the citizenry of tomorrow and law enforcement is much improved. A lot of these kids have never seen police officers other than when there's a shooting, when they've arrested one of their relatives. They're not going to have the interaction other than in the school, where they provide not just the support at the door, but they constantly work on that, developing relationships, showing a model, targeting the children that are probably at most risk. They learn a lot from other kids who say weapons, drugs, bullying, all the things that you hear about, the problems in school, can be addressed by law enforcement in a very unique way, so that it allows our teachers and the principals, the administrators to go about the education of our children. So I would recommend it as something that you look at in terms of an investment in the future relationship between the citizens of tomorrow and the students of today. So it's something that it's really worked well in Indiana, and I put it to your attention. So thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Sheriff Hodgson. He's the sheriff of Bristol County, Massachusetts. Sheriff Hodgson was appointed sheriff of Bristol County May 21st, 1997 by Governor Wells and was sworn in officially June 2nd, 1997 by Lieutenant Governor Paul Salucci. Is that right? Salucci. Immediately set out to implement his goals for correction reform, public safety, and raising the standards for the Bristol County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Hodgson believes that public safety first responder groups can best serve the community when working in a collaborative effort. Sheriff?
Chairman Reichert, members of the task force, let me first start by saying that I really commend you for your leadership in putting this task force together. It's not only refreshing, but I think it's going to be the catalyst that's going to begin to get us to a point in this nation where we can start repairing the strain that's come through the demonization of law enforcement over these tragic incidents. And let me start by just pointing out that I am testifying on behalf of the major county sheriffs in the United States. If we are a nation that believe that public trust in the safety of our communities is paramount to preserving individual rights and maintaining safe and secure communities, then we must insist that situations be reviewed without confirmatory bias by those who wish to satisfy a political agenda. As you know, the trust between law enforcement and our communities is at an all-time low. It has led to an elevated defiance of our laws and unprecedented attacks and murdering of 86 police officers and deputy sheriffs over the past 9 months. The decline in respect of our laws and those who are sworn to enforce them has caused our law enforcement officers to become more reactionary and less proactive. It's caused them to hesitate when they otherwise should act in the interest of their own welfare and that of those we are sworn to protect. The irresponsible practice of this administration, some members of Congress, and some state and local politicians to preempt the outcome of investigations like Ferguson has demoralized law enforcement officers to a point where they are fearful of unfair public scrutiny, which ultimately results in an overreaction of caution, making our communities less safe. Every day in our nation, police officers and deputy sheriffs have close to 1 million encounters, arrests, and other community-related events. A good number of these encounters involve people who are violating our laws, victimizing innocent people, and undermining the safety and security of our neighborhoods. Like any profession, there will be instances over the course of time where a properly trained officer will use poor judgment, falling short of professional standards. Although the risks for substandard behavior are much higher than most professions, the percentages of infractions are surprisingly low given the number of public interaction and the unpredictable behaviors of a segment of society that has become more aggressive and more violent. My testimony today is not to make excuses for substandard performances or minimize wrongful treatment of our citizenry, but merely to point out that our entire profession has been unfairly judged and demonized. For well over 10 years, law enforcement leaders have been engaged in community policing, working with interfaith councils, interacting with our youth to guide them to healthier choices, and working with neighbors who meet regularly to participate in partnerships to keep our communities safe. Budget cuts over the last few years have severely impacted these programs, minimizing the valuable dialogue that delivered a sense of unity and hope. This committee has taken the responsible position of asking those of us who have our boots on the ground what we understand to be the concerns and solutions as it relates to the rebuilding of trust between the community and our police. In order to accomplish this, it's my strong recommendation that you establish a minimum of 10 regional commissions chaired by law enforcement leaders who will convene a series of meetings with community members, including representatives of interfaith councils, citizens, educators, and our youth to discuss public safety concerns, solutions, and recommendations to the committee. It will be important the committee establish a timeline for final reports from each regional group and the areas of interest to the committee that you would like to have addressed. It is equally important, however, that these regional groups are community-driven and not include elected representatives of state, local, or federal government. As a sheriff and a regional official, I recognize that the most practical and effective solutions to community problems are derived from the input of those who are directly impacted. I truly believe this committee is looking for legitimate solutions and guidance and not politically expedient or personally advantageous outcomes. It is my humble opinion that the concept that I have proposed will identify real concerns and alternative outcomes that will reestablish confidence and trust between law enforcement and our citizens, and will provide this committee with a roadmap as to how the federal government can support our desired result. I thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Sheriff. Sheriff Kappa is the Sheriff of Wayne County, Indiana. Sheriff Kappa has served with Wayne County Sheriff's Office since 1990. He's also been elected to the Indiana Sheriff's Association Board of Directors and is the organization's incoming president. My sympathies, I served as the president of the Sheriff's Association in Washington State. You have your work cut out for you. The Wayne County Sheriff's Office received LEA accreditation last year as part of the accreditation process. The agency was audited on 165 policies and procedures related to its law enforcement operation. The Wayne County Sheriff's Office is one of only 3 sheriff's offices in the state of Indiana to hold such accreditation. Congratulations to you. And the sheriff shared with me that he first met me in 2004 when the National Sheriff's Association was, and you too. yeah, that's the first time we met in 2004 when I was still the sheriff, and we had our conference in Seattle. So it's a pleasure to see you both again, and wow, small world, huh? Sheriff?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I'd like to thank the committee and the board for inviting me to come to Washington to speak with you today. Do not want to correct the chairman, but I would not be able to retire at the time I want to if I started in 1990. Actually, I started in 1980. But it's my 35th year as a law enforcement officer with the same organization. I represent a county of 67,000 people in the state of Indiana. I have 112 employees, which 32 of those officers are enforcement officers. The rest of those are civilian and jail staff officers. I'm responsible for a jail that has 416 beds with an average daily population of anywhere from 250 to 350 inmates. I've been very fortunate in my term as sheriff because I've not had a police action, so to speak, that has had high profile attention brought to it. Or like any other organization or law enforcement agency, we do have our situations that we deal with the public on a daily basis. But I'd like to outline a few steps that my staff and I have taken since I've been in office to try to increase the public trust within Wayne County and within my organization. Right now, Wayne County is dealing with an epidemic of heroin, the use and the selling of heroin. And this has brought about some professional partnerships within my organization as well as the community that has been dealing with this situation. Upon taking office, one of my first objectives was to develop a well-defined strategic plan, which included a well-defined vision, mission, values, goals, objectives, and strategies to meet the objectives that we had chosen for my organization. Once this was completed, and it took 13 months to develop the strategic plan inside my organization, what I did was bring in a consultant to my department, someone that none of my members of my agency knew, nor did he owe anyone anything, and did a complete survey in speaking with my staff. Some felt that I was crazy and I had lost my mind by doing this. But I did receive some very positive feedback and some very positive criticism of myself and my organization that I had just taken over. Now I can improve myself and my organization. Once we completed that, we cascaded the entire strategic plan within the organization. I attended meetings with all my supervisors of their squads to show my support to that supervisor as they explained our plan and what was expected of all the employees within the organization, what our values were going to be, how we were going to operate, what our objectives were, and what those strategies were to meet those objectives for the year. After we completed that, we took on the next task. That was to receive our professional accreditation status again. My agency was accredited back in the early 90s, and I was a patrol officer back then. And I could see the value of being an accredited agency. I've seen what it did for our agency, and I've also seen the trust that it brought within our community for being an accredited agency. I appointed an accreditation manager, and I'm happy to say that in 2013, we did receive our professional accreditation status. That's when I had the pleasure of meeting the gentleman to my right as we received that professional accreditation status. I am a firm supporter of accreditation for law enforcement agencies. I feel that it increases the trust within your community because they know that you have met the highest standards that you could possibly meet for a law enforcement agency. This also brings about accountability. Not that law enforcement agencies do not have accountability now, but I'm a firm believer that what gets measured does in fact get done. Accreditation requires me as the administrator of my agency, the head of my agency, to make sure and mandate that certain things are done. I believe that does increase the accountability and the trust that the community has with my organization. I'm such a believer in accreditation that we have now started the accreditation process for my jail division, which is over 600 standards. We've set a projected date of next year to be completed with that project. The reason I'm doing this is that I want to be able to say before I leave as sheriff, because we are term limited, that the Wayne County Sheriff's Office is accredited not only in the enforcement division, but also in this jail division. And the citizens of that county have the most professional organization they could have protected. I'd also like to say as a law enforcement officer that I'm very grateful for what you're doing. There are thousands of officers upon thousands of officers every day put on a uniform, get in that squad or that unit, and go take that call for service and never ask for a thank you. For what you're doing today, you're telling us thank you for what we're doing, and it's greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Sheriff. You didn't know this, but right before the hearing, the citizens of Wayne County called, and even though you're term limited, they wanted me to use a 1990 date so that you'd stay. So
You've been talking about
that
county
was
council.
perfect. Mr. Hartley, you're next, and Mr. Hartley is the Executive Director of the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, called CALEA, a position he has held since January 2014. Prior to that, Mr. Hartley served as CALEA's Deputy Director and Chief of Staff for nearly 6 years. Mr. Hartley began his career with Greensboro, North Carolina Police Department, and eventually becoming the Assistant Chief of Police there. Craig has also worked for the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services, where he led the agency's policy, planning, and research division. Welcome, and we welcome your testimony, Mr. Hartley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the Policy and Task Force Committee. On behalf of the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, commonly referred to as CALEA, I want to say thank you again for this invitation to present ideas on police and community relations. As you already know, CALEA is an organization that develops public safety standards and administers a credentialing program entitled accreditation. As central tenets of our CALEA accreditation program, participating agencies directly impact public trust through accountability to the general public with responsiveness and observance of individual rights. They also create environments where citizens feel safe in their communities by establishing high ethical standards and remaining respectful in public interactions. They do this by maintaining a workforce that's prepared to address common and unusual public safety circumstances with competency and confidence. They also keep crime reduction and investigative responsibilities as a key objective with sensitivity to the perceptions and matters of the public. The accredited agencies also apply sound business approaches with respect for public resources, and they have established policy procedures for the use of authority in a fair and impartial manner, including the use of the minimum amount of force necessary to accomplish lawful objectives. Over the past 18 months, this country has observed situations where public confidence has eroded, resulting in undesirable outcomes regarding police and community relations. Although I believe there is no single solution to these issues, CALEA accreditation does provide a strategy that promotes best practices through the application of policing standards. As a result, the model promotes community confidence and instills accountability across all levels of participating agencies. You should know that about 5% of this nation's law enforcement agencies participate which equates to a little more than 25% of this nation's law enforcement officers working for enrolled agencies. Given this level of penetration, the standards serve as a very powerful tool for influencing police policy and practice. The standards remain relevant through a dynamic process of review and development by leaders in the public safety industry, which includes practitioners, academicians, judicial officials, and other subject matter experts. Additionally, research from leading professional associations is leveraged, and the process considers information from social and special interest groups on such topics as victims' rights and procedural justice. CALEA recently launched a special review of its standards to consider the findings from recent special investigations of police agencies and contemporary policy research, with a real focus on crafting and creating and maintaining service philosophies that balance the need for safety and security with constitutionally protected rights and freedoms. Beyond simple policy and practice, the process of accreditation focuses on intended outcomes. This is accomplished through a sophisticated system of linking standards, policies, practices, and organizational objectives during assessment exercises. It's reinforced through data collection, on-site observation, agency reporting, community input, and public commission hearings. As examples of our standards, participating agencies must demonstrate effective citizen complaint procedures. This must include the investigation of all complaints, including those of an anonymous nature. These procedures must adhere to timelines for notifications to complainants and result in the posting of summary data for the public's consumption. From an operational perspective, integrity in criminal investigative procedures is included in the accreditation process. This involves accountability for the preservation, collection, maintenance, and presentation of evidence. Additionally, policies related to interviews, lineups, show-ups must be developed and followed to support sound investigative efforts. CALEA accreditation requires agencies to develop community involvement practices to establish strong liaison with community organizations, the involvement of community members in the development of policy, and the publicizing of agency objectives. Although these are only a few outputs of the accreditation process, I think it demonstrates how standards address core issues impacting community confidence while supporting police as a legitimate service institution. As an association, it's important to know that CALEA supports reasonable legislation to improve professionalism in the field of public safety. We endorse the concept of voluntary participation in accreditation to promote productive relationships with agencies. We advocate for incentives that support agencies pursuing accreditation, and we support stronger interactions with governmental and non-governmental entities. We believe in approaches that gradually and systematically transition agencies to involvement with us. And I think it's important to know that the more than 1,030 public safety agencies enrolled in CALEA accreditation have voluntarily committed to the demonstrating professional excellence through our standards. Mr. Chair, I will end there, but I appreciate again your opportunities that you have provided us to present on our process and its value in the law enforcement community.
Thank you, Mr. Hartley. Dr. Jackson is the director of Rand Corporation's Safety and Justice Program, which conducts research on topics related to public safety and the performance of the U.S. criminal justice system for federal law enforcement and other agencies, urban police departments, and other clients. Dr. Jackson recently authored a report entitled Respect and Legitimacy, a Two-Way Street, Strengthening Trust Between Police and the Public in an Era of Increasing Transparency. The chair now recognizes Mr. Jackson. Dr.
Thank you very much. Chairman and members of the task force, thank you for the invitation to speak to you this afternoon. Events in recent months have focused national attention on the relationship between police and the public they serve. While many communities enjoy very strong and productive relationships between police and the public, in others profound fractures exist, especially between law enforcement and minority or economically disadvantaged communities. These events are happening at the same time that changes in the information environment, driven in large part by information technology, social media, the internet, have created the potential for new public awareness of how police do their jobs on a day-to-day basis. So we've seen video footage of police officers in action spreading far and wide on the internet, round-the-clock media coverage of situations like those in Ferguson or Baltimore, making images of police responding under very demanding circumstances broadly available, Consent decrees have involved the release of increasingly detailed data sets on policing strategies, tactics, and their effects on members of the public. And even members of the public are assembling their own data sets on department or even officer behavior and making that information broadly available. As a result, the country today faces the challenge of improving relationships between the public and police department and the criminal justice system more broadly, and doing so in this information environment. However, in my view at least, the changes in technology and society that we're experiencing, which are significantly increasing the transparency of policing in a number of different ways, have the potential to contribute to improving the relationship between the public and police. The recent events have shown that we do have a steep climb to address shortfalls in police public trust in some communities. Decades of research in criminology that we've heard referenced by other speakers here provide guidance on how to begin that climb. The elements of what's required to do so have been brought together in the concepts of procedural justice, that law enforcement organizations need to demonstrate to the public that they serve, the fairness and impartiality of their processes, treating individuals with dignity and respect, and giving the public a voice when they interact with police and in setting of policing policy. Greater transparency can help achieve the goals of procedural justice by contributing to public understanding of what police departments are doing, the results of their actions, and to provide context when individual incidents raise questions about police treatment of citizens. Indeed, it's difficult to see how trust could be improved without providing more and more credible data to lead skeptical members of the public to revisit their views of the police. Transparency can increase accountability, which can help preserve trust once it's built. This transparency is not without its complications, however. It also makes it more difficult for police departments to protect information even when there are very good reasons to do so, as there are when the integrity of investigations are at stake. It's navigating those complex consequences of transparency where actions at the national level could contribute to moving the country forward. First, police departments and the public need better and more responsive tools to monitor the health of the relationship between police departments and the communities they serve. So current best practices for assessing community views of police through things like surveys can't provide data quickly enough to support decision making in the way that other measures like crime data can. So this is an area where federal research and development funding and activities and technical assistance could help develop and support the adoption of those tools. Second, police departments need better strategies and tools to increase transparency while addressing concerns about privacy and officer safety. So the recent focus on the use of body cameras, which we've also heard about already, is a good example. Releasing footage from those cameras can have implications for officer safety, citizen privacy, and integrity of investigations, but they can also provide the public a window into normal, everyday police interactions with the public that end in positive ways, as opposed to the cell phone footage of negative events that you see on the internet. So we have different departments currently approaching handling those concerns very differently, from resisting release of any of that data all the way up to releasing a whole lot of it that's very blurred. This is an area where, in our work with departments, continued involvement of federal sort of research in developing ways of redacting video to protect officer safety, to protect privacy, while allowing sort of responsible increase in transparency would be beneficial. Finally, it would be valuable for the federal government still to make trusted data available to let citizens put their own department's performance in a national context. Though there are significant differences in how policing is done across the country, having solid data sets collected the same way across the country on variables such as fatalities during interactions with police, broader use of force issues, and the use of specific police tactics would provide a baseline for people to put their department's activities in a national context. In the wake of Ferguson and the events that followed, discussion regarding how to strengthen the relationship between the police and the public have been wide-ranging. Developing strategies to increase transparency can provide the public with more information to actually educate that debate and inform their judgments about incidents of concern that will invariably arise in the course of even the best implemented policing strategies. More transparency could also help police agencies by providing a stronger foundation for building relationships with communities that in turn could help them police more effectively and more safely. However, transparency is not without costs and complications, and that's where national efforts to help navigate that could be helpful. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate.
Thank you, Doctor. And this concludes the testimony part of our hearing today, so we'll go into questions. First, we'll start with Chairman Messer, and comments and questions from the Chairman.
Thank you. First, question for Sheriff Kappa. You know, as we talk about the tension between law enforcement and the communities you protect across the country, I think some believe it's largely just an urban challenge. But the law enforcement officers I talked to in our district have pointed out to me that when these major incidents occur around the country, that they see a difference in their day-to-day interactions out in the middle of, you know, rural Indiana where we live. And could you just talk a little bit about how these tensions are impacting the work of your team in Wayne County?
Well, you need to remember that nationally, when those events are profiled in the media, everyone's seeing that. I agree with that statement. I've seen it firsthand where just in routine traffic stops, general attitude towards law enforcement is different after events like that, high-profile events take place. I don't think it's just in the large metropolitan cities, but it's all over the United States right now. And there are many theories, I think, of why people act the way that they do today. And we'd probably be here all day if we tried to discuss all those, but that is a true statement. I believe I've had my officers make comments to me before about interactions they've had with people on the street after these incidents have taken place and occurred.
Yeah. Next question for the Attorney General. Sheriff Kappa mentioned the heroin epidemic in Wayne County. We have an epidemic of intravenous drug use really throughout our region of the state, contributing to many of the challenges that law enforcement faces. I know you're the chair of the Prescription Drug Task Force in Indiana and actually helped create that. Talk a little bit about that work, and I'm not sure it's fully understood across the country, the depth and breadth of the epidemic we're now facing.
Well, I think the statistic that really helps frame this is that 80% of the victims of overdose from heroin started off with a doctor's prescription. So what we used to think of as a poor choice of someone to use heroin really might have emanated from the poor prescribing habits of a doctor. An 18-year-old who blows out his knee playing football and is given a 90-day prescription for oxycodone is very likely to be an addict by the time they've run through the 90-day supply. People who are smokers should have never been prescribed because they've already demonstrated an addictive quality, with nicotine. So what we found is we've overprescribed these opioids. The United States consumes over 80% of the world's opioid narcotics, and we represent 4% of the world's population. So this is a man-made problem, and as we crack down on the pill mills, as we, let's say, restrict the supply of the oxycodone or the opioids through whatever means, we've now got a new prescribing rule in Indiana that's already reduced prescribing habits of doctors over 11% in the first month. So as we restrict the supply of the prescription drugs, we're seeing the flood of heroin into our communities. And it's not just an urban, this is everywhere you see people who are addicted with oxycodone and Percocet and the others. Indiana has the unfortunate, let's say, title of being #1 in pharmacy robberies. This is not per capita, this is 178 yet this year. We've had young kids who will rob for the oxycodone. One of them put the gun down and waited for the police to come so he could get help. So the heroin epidemic is really being driven by opioids that were prescribed, and now as we restrict that and recognize the problems we've created, we're going to see massive, let's say, I hate to be alarmist, but we're about to see a massive number of heroin use in the United States.
With others here, I don't want to over-occupy their time. Just need to make a statement that becomes a question for others. Just this group, this panel, and those that are working with us on this panel, we have a strong aversion that federal mandates being the answer to these challenges. But we really are here today because we want to say thank you and we want to know how we can help. So my hope is, as we go through the rest of our questioning, that if you have an idea about what we can do from a federal policy perspective to make a difference and help you do your job, that's what we're trying to learn today. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. Next, we'll recognize Mr. King.
Thank you, Dave. Chairman Reichert.
Dave's good.
Okay, you go. Sure. Dr. Jackson, I read the report, I listened to your testimony, and theoretically, it's hard to disagree with a lot of it. And as far as transparency, I understand that, and as Congressman Knight said, the more and more police departments are going to the body cameras. But I wonder if with all the transparency and all the laying out of the facts, is that really going to change the facts on the ground, at least the perceptions on the ground? For instance, the Rand Corporation did a report back in 2006 with the NYPD, where there were then allegations that the police were stopping too many African Americans. And it was, Rand came out and said that I think 69% of the perpetrators were identified as being black, but yet 53% of those who were stopped were black. So in other words, it was just a number of whites being stopped and blacks. And yet that never really translated into the public view. So in other words, more whites than blacks proportionally being stopped. And yet you hardly ever see that reported anywhere. And I said before that just less than 3 years ago, 70% of New Yorkers support the NYPD. Now that has changed significantly. And really what's happened in the last several, and this is even before the Garner case. I believe it's politicians, such as Mayor de Blasio, for instance, who was putting his biracial son on television saying he's afraid to walk down the street because if black he's going to be stopped by the cops, playing that over and over and over again. That became the central theme of his campaign. When he became the mayor, and he had you're talking for more civilian involvement, and he set up a meeting, he had the police commissioner, Bill Bratton, who was one of the best in the country, and then sitting next to him, equal status, was Al Sharpton, who basically was threatening Bratton, if you don't do what we want, there's going to be consequences. So I think unless we have people in politics, people who are leaders, who are willing to look at the facts, look at the transparency, has anyone in this country come out and said that Michael Brown was a criminal? Has anyone said that Officer Wilson was right? And this was the Obama Justice Department with a detailed report on that case showed that everything Wilson did was right, that all of the stories about Brown were lies, and yet to this day, when they talk about Michael Brown being a martyr. So I guess what I'm saying is, until we change the public dialogue, all of the changes whether it's transparency, whether it's factual reporting, whether it's changing tactics, I don't know how effective it's going to be. And also, the reality is with transparency, you can get, and you can understand the alternative to it, but it can get rougher because there's very few, and the Congressman Knight would know a lot more about this than I would, but there's very few arrests that look good. I grew up in a neighborhood, I'm not comparing it to the African-American neighborhoods where you have white cops coming in, but my neighborhood was a pretty bad neighborhood. 2 guys went to electric chair. One guy was brother of a good friend of mine, sat in front of me in school. So I've seen, when the cops would come in, and you're a bunch of kids hanging around the corner, they can't be asking these kids to please leave. They know it's a gang. They go in, guys are up against the wall. It looks terrible. But I think as Bill Bratton also said, it can look awful and still be lawful. So how do we change that? The politicians are still going to be using every instance they can to ignore what's good and focus on what's bad.
Well, it may be my researcher bias in it, but my belief is that the antidote for sort of anecdotal bad information is more good information. And so, sort of thinking about body camera footage and thinking about, how do we get to the point where we can release more information to show more interactions between the police and the public. Yes, some will look better than others, but we have had examples of positive police interactions go viral in the same way that we've had, sort of examples of cell phone video of negative police interventions go viral. And so, from that perspective, sort of a path towards a future where we're putting out enough information that there's a context for the anecdotes, where there's more context to make it more difficult for individuals, whatever their sort of political or other agendas, to sort of use them in different ways, to provide the public more information to draw their own conclusions about them. I think is the path to sort of getting towards a future. We now live in a time where we're all carrying around a camera here. Everyone has the opportunity to sort of put the one video that they think will get a lot of hits up. And I think really the only answer to that is, figuring out how to release more information to keep it in context. With respect to the Red Report, I would say we would love it if our reports would have as much impact as a cell phone video does in some time, and that's something that we're constantly working on, but anyway, thank you.
Maybe just 30 seconds on it. Yeah, I would just say, in New York, I don't want to be overly parochial on this, but I mean, murder has gone from 2,300 a year to less than 400. 90% of murder victims in New York are African American. And, Sheriff Hatcher was saying, you find cops today, I know, stepping back, they're afraid if they are proactive and something goes bad, that the mayor's not going to stand by them or the media's going to go after them. And as a result of that, you're going to see crime going up in the minority areas, the ones who suffer the most from this. So, again, I appreciate your testimony, appreciate your report. I think this type of dialogue is very helpful. And Sheriff, thank you for your testimony.
Thanks, Mr. King. Judge Poe.
Thank you, Sheriff. I guess I came in at the right time when Peter King said my neighbor got the electric chair. But thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I'd like to know a little more about your neighborhood. General Zeller, some of your comments about interaction with the police and law enforcement and the justice system, we kind of measure success by how many people get arrested, how many people go to jail, how much fines. And we never are able to measure success based on deterrence. How many people don't choose to commit a crime? We've never been able to measure that very well. So that's why I think overall in the last few years or numerous years, money does not go for prevention because you don't measure that. You can't. But you can measure how many people get arrested. It seems to me programs like the DARE program, we don't have that anymore in Houston. There's no money for it. I thought on an anecdotal level, that worked tremendously to have a DARE officer in the schools talking about issues exactly what you have been talking about, where they're learning about guns and gangs and drugs and bullying from each other. You have a DARE officer, and it finds out they're a real person, and how the kids in the 4th grade, that's not what we had in Houston, seem to be admire the DARE officer, go to the DARE officer for questions or comments or problems that they have. Can you weigh in on that type of interaction in the school program, whether you think that's a good idea or not?
Well, it's exactly what the school resource officer program is kind of the DARE program now moved into kind of the internet, let's say. I think when we first did this in 2012, we first did a needs assessment. So we essentially did a canvassing of school corporations, the principals, the teachers, the students and parents. And it was pretty clear that this was something they were really looking for. Again, not just based on a shooting, live shooting in a school. So I mean, that's what gets the public's attention, but it's that everyday relationship building. So the young kids learn to respect someone who's there to serve and protect, as opposed to just hearing about it from others or seeing it on TV or listening to it out on the streets. So I do think that the interaction in whatever form inside of a school really develops a completely different relationship. And the ones that are really the best, who, you can see them, you walk into the high schools or the grade schools and they get high fives when kids come in. They may want to go and talk to one of them privately. They're having problems at home. It even helps with some of the abuse that the kids get at home. If there's any problems out on the street, a lot of the law enforcement tips come from within the school. Nobody knows that it was because one of the students told one of the school resource officers about something going on in their neighborhood. So it's really, I don't want to make it sound like it's the silver bullet, but at least in terms of the investment in a new relationship between citizenry and law enforcement, I think it's the best investment. The ROI is very high.
Let me ask a couple more questions. Last night was National Night Out. It seems to me that that's a good way to get a lot of police, as we say in Texas, to the neighborhoods, to meet people that live in the neighborhood and vice versa. Some are better than others, but in a way, anybody want to weigh in on that type of community policing? Sheriff?
If I may, Congressman, any positive relationships and outreach to the community is only going to benefit. As was mentioned by the Attorney General, the activity in the schools with police officers is really paramount. I mean, if we're going to stop, turn this recidivism issue around and stop having people go to jail and start to build these relationships and have children understand whose parents maybe aren't giving them the best messages about law enforcement, it's hard for a child to ignore the relationship when someone's doing something good for them and encouraging them in the right direction. And so, likewise in the community, when law enforcement reaches out and interfaces with people to try to help them with issues and problems, it can only help to serve the fostering of better relationships. And ultimately for the children, if we're ever going to stop this problem of kids going to jail and turn our society back toward a better, more lawful place, then I think that's the key, because we never want children to go through the front door of the jail. We're constantly putting our resources in this country on the back end. Once they're in, we're dumping all the money in the back end, and all we're doing is we're filling up the pipe and never addressing the fact that the pipe's got to be closed off here.
Last question of the 5 experts. Some communities don't have a problem with, in a sense, that there's police community tension, and other communities do. So what is happening in communities where there is a good working relationship with the police versus those communities where there's not? What's the difference? Can you name some things that you see are the difference?
Well, I don't mind speaking from the accreditation perspective about what it brings to the table, Mr. Poe. I will tell you, I was listening with great interest about the DARE program and the school resource officer program and those type of things we talked about. And one of the things that I think accreditation brings to the table is the experience of all those other organizations that have had good and bad outcomes from their processes, and it brings that into the focus as a best practice. And I'll give you an example of how this happens. So we had school resource officers in school for quite a number of years. And my father was responsible for that, his jurisdiction, and I had that responsibility for a short time in mine. And what we found during that, and what CLEA has extrapolated from those experiences, is that only works if there's a good understanding between the police and the school administrators about what the expectations are as they enter those environments. There's a good understanding about what the students can expect from that and what the parents can expect of the police as well. In some ways, bringing the police into that environment can bring children into the criminal justice system sooner than you wanted to. When I was a kid, if I got in a fight in a hallway or something, it usually ended up a teacher jerking me up by the collar and sent me on my way. In the environments where the police officers there, sometimes it can create an environment where there may be an arrest, which is something different than you may or may not want to occur. And I think sometimes there can be role confusion for those police officers, but again, the accreditation process works to help bring those experiences together and at least let my friend the sheriff here use that as a tool to develop policy that complements his organization's needs, his community's needs. And I will tell you, that matriculates not just in the school resource officer program, but through the accreditation process with just about all kinds of policy development. You mentioned this National Night Out campaign, and that's a huge success, and we recognize that for quite a number of years now. But that only works when there's coordinated leadership that understands the value of that, and they have to get that roadmap from somewhere. It's not intuitive always. And again, I think that's the value of having a process or a framework for making those types of things happen, Mr. Poe.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you. Judge, Mr. Knight.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of questions of 2 sheriffs. How are you seeing your departments in proactive behavior? Are they still making as many arrests, as many stops, as many traffic stops? Is it difficult, or are they giving you feedback saying, you know, with all the things happening today, am I going to put my career on the line by making 10 stops instead of 4 stops?
Well, part of our strategic plan basically is we picked 2 objectives for the enforcement division and 2 objectives for the jail division. for 2015. We do not tell the officers they can't go out and enforce other actions. This is what our main focus as an organization is. This is our blueprint. It's a living, breathing document, so it's going to change, obviously. For example, right now in my county, the 2 objectives for the enforcement was to reduce personal injury and fatal traffic accidents by 10% for the year 2015. Also reduce property crimes by 10%. We're also going out and doing our normal routine calls for service, but we started a new program. It's called the Wayne County Safe Roads Initiative because of that objective. That was thought of by one of my supervisors and came up with that idea. What we're trying to do by doing that is they're having interaction with the public, and it's not always negative. Someone's not receiving a traffic ticket. It could be just receiving a traffic warning. But the other thing that I firmly believe about a strategic plan is that instead of having an organization where everyone else is kind of going off their own direction, you have a vision, you tell them what this vision is, kind of just like what you were referring to about the DARE program, which we still have, by the way, Congressman, both with my department and school resource officers. But that gives them a directive and a direction in which to go. We ask for their feedback. Every year, about this time actually, and next month, we'll be sitting down, my sergeants will be sitting down with their squads and saying, all right, what do you feel that we need to have for our attention is for 2016 in the enforcement division? What do you feel needs the most attention in the jail division for 2016? We'll pick those objectives, we'll develop our strategies, and then we'll move forward for that year. As I tell my staff, if we don't make one of those objectives, that doesn't mean that we failed. Because we've already succeeded by choosing those strategies and trying to get to that point where we wanted to be. So we didn't make it this year. So let's redo our strategies and look at it again and try to make it again next year.
If I may, Congressman, in our county, we're in a pretty difficult area, some urban settings, a lot of gang issues, serious drug problems. But one of the things that we're doing is we're interfacing with these gang members. In fact, before they go back into any community, the local law enforcement people are notified they're coming back to their community. They will come to our facility ahead of time. They'll begin to work with that person before they're released and tell them, look, if you come here back in the community, we expect you not to get involved in more problems. If you have somebody who's trying to encourage you to continue into a gang, come see us. Here are the social service agencies that are available to you. We'll help you out, come to us, and we're seeing some real success. We're also taking some proactive approaches in some of the cities where they're actually going up to the drug houses, walking up and knocking on the door and telling them, look, we know you're dealing drugs here. And we'll let you know right up front, we're paying attention every single day, and anybody that comes by here and tries to buy the drugs, if they got a blinker out, they got any kind of a problem, it's going to cost them a lot more than just the money they were going to pay for the drugs, and you're going to be entirely too expensive for them to be able to get the drugs based on the problems that they're running into us. And they're finding more and more now that they tend to be quickly asking, how quick can I leave here? And the neighborhoods are starting to get reestablished in a way that they're not running into the problems. It's getting them away from luring the kids and so forth. So we still have the consistent problems, but we're looking for ways to interact with these individuals in a way that we can get them out of our communities and start to put our direction toward the kids, which we also provide programs for.
So, Dr. Jackson, maybe a question about some study here. My third day on the job was Rodney King. I was in an adjoining district, and it really enlightened, I think, police work across the country, that something could be filmed, and it could be all over the news in every station across the country within a couple days, and people hadn't seen an arrest like that. Today, I think that just about every arrest is going to be filmed in some way or fashion with as many camera phones as are out there. My question is, as we're moving, my father-in-law, his dad was a LAPD Hollywood cop for about 30 years, and he used to tell me all the stories about his dad, and I would say, that's not how police work is today. It's quite a bit different. And I'm sure if he was still alive, he'd be looking at me and I'd be telling him stories, and he'd say, well, that's not how you do police work. So I understand that it evolves, but the one factor about police work is there's always got to be a little line of respect there has to be between the community and between law enforcement. I'm afraid that we're eroding that line too much. Now, I'm not saying we have to be Mayberry here, but I'm not saying that we have to be the hardest thing in the world, like maybe my father-in-law's dad was, but there does have to be respect. And I'm afraid that when we talk about the community and law enforcement and all of this and how nice law enforcement has got to be, remember, the community, all they care about is a safe community. When I go home, I want to make sure my wife and my kids are safe and there's not burglars running around the neighborhood. I want to make sure that my sheriff's department is proactive and they're picking up the guys that are out capering at night. I want them to do that. I want them to be proactive. Sometimes when you arrest somebody, they don't want to go to jail, and it just isn't nice. That's just the way it is, and that's the way police work will be for the next however many 100 years. So I'm asking you, do you see something that maybe we're jumping over too far? And we're saying that police have to be a different breed than maybe we need them to be.
Well, I mean, certainly today's environment where everything could be filmed, whether it's because there's a body camera that there's a policy decision to adopt, or an officer's using their own phone, or a citizen's using their own phone, changes what was a semi-private public interaction between an officer and a citizen to something that could be extremely public. On the one hand, that makes every officer potentially a public information officer. But when you look at the literature on procedural justice, and I'm relying on a lot of other criminologists' work here, it's not that the police officer has to always be friendly and has to always give the citizen what they want and has to, sort of produce a result that everyone's happy with at the end. It's the process that it goes through. So there have been studies looking at interventions where the officer explaining what's going on, sort of in the context of a traffic stop. Here's why I stopped you. Here's why it was a problem. Giving the person an opportunity to talk, even if that doesn't change the outcome. Oh, I'm sorry, I was distracted. I went too fast. Even then, if the outcome is negative from the perspective of the citizen, their view of law enforcement and their view of that interaction can be positive at the end. So this isn't about sort of law enforcement, sort of becoming, public relations, but it's, sort of law enforcement, sort of going through this process that engages the person, where, when you look at the end, even if that traffic stop was filmed and someone looked at it, that would be an interaction where they looked at it as, okay, that was a respectful interaction both ways between the officer and the citizen. And with more of those becoming public, hopefully, through more transparency, it sort of sets the pattern for, sort of respect that goes both ways. Because studies have also shown that when folks respect law enforcement, things are more efficient for law enforcement and better for policing. But building that respect is a mutual decision. So, it's putting enough information out there to support that decision on the basis both of publics that are very positive towards the police, but publics who are also skeptical.
And don't get me wrong, I believe that the law enforcement community does everything as good as they can. And 99.999 times out of 100, it goes the way it's supposed to go. Those never make the internet. They never make the internet. My dad used to always say, 100 attaboys will be taken away by one dumb thing. And so that is the absolute truth. Is the one thing you'll see on the internet is maybe that time when the law enforcement officer got a little too heated and the exchange was still in a professional manner, but he just got a little too heated, and that goes right on the internet. As opposed to the thousands of stops that he made before that went absolutely by the numbers. So that's the only reason I bring that up, is that we do have to be a little cautious with the law enforcement community, that we want them to be proactive. We want them to arrest people that are out there doing bad things. We want them to be a service. I can't tell you the hundreds of calls that I showed up to see the woman or see the man, and it wasn't a police call, but we were the free service and we were there to help. And so I always thought of Mayberry RFD when I showed up to those. Well, I got to get the Frisbee off the roof, or whatever it was. Yeah, those are police calls because you're the free service. I get that. But it's that one call that's going to get on the internet. So that's why I always say this in caution, is how we move forward. The body cameras, I think, do help police officers more than they help the community. I do. Because I trust the cops, and I know that they're doing the right thing, so I want to film them. Sure.
Could I just add, just to that point, I think what you're hitting on, I think Congressman King did as well, was this issue of where do you get the balance? How do you, as you say, the one video that's going to show up is the one, because that's what sells the media and so forth and so on. And the challenge we have is that people have such short time frames to pick up what the message is, and the consistent message is always the videos where an officer may have used poor judgment or what have you. It's my view that what we need to do is we have to sort of offset that dialogue, that negative dialogue, that negative media approach by proactively marketing the good things that are going on through public service announcements. You know, the officer that's giving the homeless person shoes, kneeling down, or fixing the chain on the bicycle for the kids that they originally went to respond to or fighting. Those kinds of things. And I was speaking to the chairman before about this whole issue of, for sheriffs, it's sheriffs, you know, protecting your public safety, saving your taxpayer dollars, and showing the collage of things that they're doing to help seniors and to fight crime in their communities and create these community groups like the law enforcement people. And if we can get that balance, we can take away this sort of dominance of the negative approach that the media take and certain activist groups are taking to try to demonize law enforcement and not show the real balance that's there. And I really think that we're at that point where we almost have to create this positive marketing strategy to offset the opponents, if you will.
I should say officer night, thank you. Hey, I've been busy scribbling down lots of notes. There's a lot spinning around. We have to do this again. Continually bring in different groups from around the country, and the representation here from Texas to California to Indiana to New York and sorry about your neighbor, Washington State. And then your vast background and where you come from and your experiences with agencies and organizations around the world. I think back to in 1972 when I was hired. It was the hiring process. Just thinking about the change in the hiring process from then. They had just really switched to a testing. Civil service test, and prior to that, they were hiring, retired pro football players and pro athletes, because they wanted big, strong guys, no women back then. Until 1975 or 6 or so, we got our first female officer, and of course, it was a huge uproar in the sheriff's office as to who was going to be training the female. They didn't want her in their car, and they needed backup, and of course the female officers proved that they could do the job just as well as the male officers can. And so there's just been this evolution of not only law enforcement but just of society in general, the way we look at cops and the way the cops interact and look at community. And we've really been talking about, and they mentioned this too, so when you talk about body cameras and or videos taken, I was the sheriff during WTO, and we had an incident during WTO where one of my deputies ran into, this is the way I'll put it today, this hearing, ran into a person wearing a Red Cross armband, kneeling over a first aid kit, and it was determined to be, it was videoed. And the video was replayed over and over and over again in hearings, in appeals, process through with the union and arbitrators, and the whole question was it a quick kick or a trip? So like Seahawks football game last night, the ball bouncing out of the end zone, I'm definitely sure it wasn't touched. But others are definitely sure it was touched before it went out of the back of the end zone. So those videos, the body cameras and other videos can be replayed and replayed, and still there can be disagreement as to what the video really shows. And so it has to be looked at in conjunction with any and all evidence and testimony provided by eyewitnesses and physical evidence, of course. So the video alone is not always the definitive piece of information that we gather. So, but I do agree. I think it has a great deal of benefit in the process of educating the public and sharing positive stories, and I think also showing the true nature of what the majority of our police officers across this country have in their hearts, and that is to serve their nation and to protect the public. And yes, there are bad apples in police departments and sheriff's offices across the country, just like there are bad apples that work for Microsoft in my community, or any other company and business across this country. We're human beings, and we're not. None of us are perfect. The two areas I really think that we've hit on in a broad sense. Number one, the kind of a long-term solution and the short term. The short term would be the body cameras, the school resource officers, the storefront officers, the accreditation process, building that trust with the community. The citizens academies, I think, are just an outstanding opportunity to bring the community and actually ride with cops, and go through the don't shoot scenarios. We really recognize having the media go through that. I'm sure the sheriffs have done that. The media comes out of there going, wow, was that hard to decide whether or not you be taking that sort of action or not. Did I just kill the citizen? Did I just save someone? I don't know what I just did. That all happened so fast. Those are really great tools, and I know they're used across the country. So those short-term things are things hopefully that we can help with. The long-term things, more in my mind, and we've had this conversation with a lot of sheriffs and police chiefs across the country, and just last Saturday or Friday when I met with the National Association of Counties in Seattle, talked about really what can we do to, what are the real solutions here? Because body cameras aren't the solution. Okay, they're just not. School resource officers are part of an educational process. That's not really the solution. Where does it really start? It starts in the home. And so there's a lot more to this than law enforcement, and we also recognize that law enforcement, I can think of, I have been in the poorest of the poorest homes, and the richest of the rich. And so you see how some of America lives, and why. Maybe they have an attitude, or they have a lack of hope. And so, as a part of the community, law enforcement has the responsibility in helping the community and working. And I know we do that because we're in these homes, and we see it. We understand it. The comment, fight crime, invest in kids. We get that. You'll not find a cop that says fight crime, invest in kids is not the right way to go. Invest in kids means making sure that they have a loving home. So now we're talking about a long-term solution to a real problem where members of Congress get it, but sometimes in the political world we can't make it happen. But kids need to be in a loving home. How are you defining it? A loving home, having the opportunity to be supported in obtaining an education and creating hope for themselves and their families. And what happens as a result of that? They have respect for the community, they have respect for their leaders. Members of Congress have problems with gaining that kind of respect. I was listening to some of the comments about, trying to convince people that you are that you're friendly, that you're trying to do the right thing for them, trying to make everybody happy. That sounded real familiar. I guess it wasn't too much of a stretch going to talk to Congress. But so that's, I really got a lot out of this hearing today. And what we want to do is carry on this dialogue and work with you. And one question I have, you know, on CALEA, what's the biggest hurdle to departments getting credit?
Yeah, I think there's a number of them, Chairperson Reichert. One of them is just having the internal resources to make it happen. And oftentimes they need support in order to have that occur. They also need state and local support, just encouragement so that the community will endorse what they're trying to make happen there. And then finally, sometimes I think they need technical assistance on how to develop sound policies and practices to support the broader goals of the accreditation process.
And there's a cost attached to all of those things.
There is, and it's not, the cost actually doesn't come from CALEA. There is an overhead cost for us, but the biggest cost for agencies is in the process of developing their policies and procedures to complement those best practices.
Right. And the two sheriffs are both accredited. What's the cost to you financially, resource-wise? You guys want to comment on that?
I was able to get a grant through for the initial startup cost of our accreditation. I have a discretionary fund, which is called a commissary account, that I was able to pay for the assessors coming to my organization to do the assessment. The overall cost for the agency was minimal compared to benefits that we received.
Sure.
I think, well, for us, of course, the resources within the department to make sure that people were available to do the work to prepare for the ACA accreditation was costly in regards to reallocation of staff and the overtime issues. And then, of course, the cost itself, we were able to likewise get out of discretionary monies that we had from our federal program. So it's a bit of an undertaking. It takes about a year and a half to prepare for it.
It's ongoing.
It's ongoing.
Yeah, every year. So there's a commitment of resources and money.
Yes.
Every
Yes,
year.
Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Hartley, on the technology piece, are you including that as a part of your audit of agencies as you look at now with this new technology, how agencies implement or use technology, especially in the ways that these two sheriffs have testified today? You've heard some of us mention regarding the use of technology and getting that positive message out. Are you able to kind of evaluate that, give assistance there?
We have, sir. We developed a number of standards specifically related to body-worn cameras and media collection and those types of things, how they store it, how long they keep it, what conflict of interest might exist along the way. So we try to be as comprehensive as we can, but I think what's important to understand too, that we still give enough latitude in the delivery of our product that it lets organizations develop solutions that work in their communities. It's a guidepost, if you will, to help going in the right direction.
How about social media? You're helping out with that, because that's really their opportunity to be proactive.
We have a standards review committee working on that particular issue right now. It's back and forth because there's a lot of discussion in the public safety community about how much we should actually be using that and what the implications really are for public safety institutions.
All right. Hey, thank you guys for your time. Peter?
Since both Congressman Poe and yourself made remarks about my own neighborhood, let me just say on a positive note, the brother of the guy who was an electric chair became a much decorated cop, and my father was his instructor in the police academy.
Your resolve.
I'm told that A.G. Zeller wants to be at another appointment at 4. I need to get them to talk to these guys really quick. You're still recording? There's a lag, so just wait for a minute.
I think she's gonna take